Retro Now.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. We are your visual effects artists of choice for the evening. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
Now we're just your hosts. But this episode is going to feature our discussion of Light and Magic Season 2, Episode 3. We've reviewed the previous two episodes, and now we're going to wrap up the season tonight. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are before we get started?
Sure thing, Dennis. Very easy to find us. We are on Facebook and Instagram conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield's down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. And this, like I just said, will be our discussion of Light and Magic Season 2, Episode 3, which is also the season finale. I don't know if it's a series finale. They haven't announced Season 3 yet, but we'll find out. And it is called There's No Going Back. And so this picks up after their discussion of Attack of the Clones in the previous episode. And we're going to kick off with some discussion of work that ILM did on Pirates of the Caribbean. And we'll get into a little bit of Revenge of the Sith, stuff that was going on in the model shop, and then more Pirates of the Caribbean stuff. But it's going to kind of bring us to up within the last couple of years, the way they're going with, well, that's not true. But we're going to get through some of the bigger things that happened before Lucasfilm was sold to Disney. Jay, what did you think about this episode?
Well, this series has done a really good job for me personally of just really impressing me with the complexity of what they did, but also just how incredibly diverse the work is in things that you didn't realize perhaps that ILM had their hands in or that they developed themselves. But this specific episode in particular really struck me in that it is the evolution of what ILM became in terms of the way that they were able to influence the next generation of all of these other digital effects companies. And then also competing, if you will, with all of them as well for, different types of properties and work and so on and so forth. But then also just how incredible the staff was at being so what's the word that I'm looking for? They were just true to ILM. They were just all in when it came to their devotion to it. And so just I learned a lot about the way that different effects were actually created as well. And it was just so much fun to watch. So it just continues, as you said last time, just to blow me away. But what did you think?
I liked it quite a bit. One of the things that was surprising was as much attention that the Phantom Menace got in the first episode, and then Attack of the Clones got in the second episode. Revenge of the Sith got remarkably less in this episode. It wasn't absent, but comparatively speaking, they're promoting this on the Star Wars page on Disney Plus, and so it was there, and they spent most of their time talking about lava. Of all things there, and that's fine. It was interesting to hear all that, but there's a lot of Pirates of the Caribbean talk, and you're right. There is if there is a theme of this episode, it is the evolution from being a effects and model shop to being an effects shop. They talk about kind of the demise of the model shop and what happened there and the change in the company. And that's where the title comes from. There's no going back here. In that regard. And with all of these episodes, I've been really impressed with the camaraderie amongst the team, how glowingly they all talk about each other and the things that they were able to achieve, the delight they take in making the impossible happen, and then the reverence they have from George Lucas. And one of the things that happens at the end of this episode, Fawn Davis, who was in the model shop, talks about George Lucas's legacy and says, everyone's gonna when you bring up George Lucas, everyone's gonna say Star Wars. But even more of that, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, is that George Lucas was an innovator. He talks about THX sound, what they did with special effects, editing tools, and the like, and how much George Lucas has impacted movie making in the last 50 years.
Mhm.
And he frequently just is limited as George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars. If you ever read an article about him, that's what he's known as. And that's fair. I mean, because it's like one of the biggest cultural things in the world. But he's done so much more than that for movies.
Right, right. And it's always interesting, when you think about the type of legacy that a person leaves and the type of mark that they create on the world itself. And what is the exclamation point? And for George Lucas, it's definitely Star Wars. And just the fact that yes, he created ILM and he created THX and the whole nine yards, but it's the people behind the scenes that truly saw the full spectrum of
Mhm.
what George Lucas truly was.
Right. He may not have been the guy that figured out how to make the special effects happen. He may not have been the guy that created the digital camera that was used to film these movies. And on and on and on. But he was the one that insisted they happen. He was the one that
Right.
put his resources behind these things and made them possible.
Mhm.
And Hollywood owes him a debt for that right
Right.
now.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll touch on more of that as we get through the discussion. In the past couple episodes, we've kind of talked about things in chronological order. And we could do that again, but what I'd rather do is maybe talk about parts of the episode that stood out to us the most on this. There I kind of previewed some of the things that came up in this episode, but did you have a favorite part of this episode, Jay?
Well, one of the things that always strikes me is the type of inspiration that these creators get and where their inspiration comes from and where their background is. And sometimes they come from the most humble and, unexpected kinds of backgrounds, and then they follow their passions and they follow their dreams, and then they end up at somewhere like ILM. So, talking about, for example, the original story that they were talking about with Pirates of the Caribbean and looking at all the old Ray Harryhausen movies.
Hmm.
And, it struck me that, I never really put two and two together that, and I've heard the name Ray Harryhausen before, but I grew up watching Clash the Titans, for example,
Yeah.
and I watched that movie. I cannot even tell you, Dennis, like how many times. And as a kid, the name Ray Harryhausen meant absolutely nothing to me. You know what I mean? I just knew that I loved Clash of the Titans, and I was so incredibly enamored by it. But now, kind of watching this and seeing all of the different, special effects and works that Harryhausen did and how it did in fact inspire the next generation of these creators was something that I was, I was truly impressed with. And just
Mhm.
the way that those creators were able to utilize that inspiration to create their own generation, if you will, of these special effects. And I just really, really loved that.
Yeah, there was a really awesome that's like one of the first things that they talk about in this episode
Right.
is, they're going to the Pirates of the Caribbean, and then they show some of those old effects from Ray Harryhausen with the skeletons from, I guess, Jason and the Argonauts, I think was the movie.
Yes.
But
Yep.
and of course, the big effects shot from Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl, and that's one of my favorite movies. It's probably my top 10. Is the pirates that turn into skeletons in the moonlight. And so you at the end of that segment, when you've got Ray Harryhausen, I don't know why that's a tongue twister for me, but there it is sitting down, admiring the work, looking at those
Yes.
skeletons. It's like, yeah, you can see where the inspiration came from there.
Mhm.
So it's pretty cool. I also like the discussion on Pirates of the Caribbean. John Knoll was kind of he was one of the lead people they interviewed for this entire episode. And he starts off by talking. It's like, I was given the script for the Pirates of the Caribbean, and I was like, well, there's no way this can be any good. And then you had
Right?
Polly Ing, who's the CG sequence supervisor, was like, how do you make a story out of that? Talking about the theme park, right? And then they look, the script is like, this is actually really pretty good. And then
Mhm.
they got to get into their element. They built these gigantic pirate ship models, and they would use them, they'd blow them up, and they'd drag them across the water, and they built a big pool in the back lot so that they could put these things in. And that was so much fun to watch. It's the look. I don't have the skills. I don't have the art skills. I don't have the model making skills. But how much fun would it be to have a job where you get to
Right?
go play with giant pirate ship models and have
And
them
blow
shoot
them
at
up.
each other, blow some of them up, and I mean, just put those things into motion.
It's so true. It's so true. I mean, these people are living the dream, honestly.
Mhm.
They say if you find a job, doing something that you love, you'll actually never work a day in your life. And that's what these people actually, I mean, they do. They
Yeah,
really do. And getting back to Ray Harryhausen and what you'd mentioned about him having this big smile on his face when he was watching these effects and things like that, it reminded me actually a lot of George Lucas and the way that, a lot of these innovators and these creators, they have these ideas in their head of what they want to be able to do, but they're limited to what the technology and what their resources are at the time.
yeah,
And so as you mentioned with George Lucas is finding a way to make those things happen. I think that that's where a lot of the joy for Ray Harryhausen came from is just being able to see like, oh my gosh, like this is what I wanted to do. And bam, you people have done it. And this is just watching that next generation. And, we've used the term passing the baton quite a lot, but it's that type of joy. And, as Yoda would say, we are what they grow beyond. And I think that that's kind of the true, message of that story. And I love that.
yeah. As long as we're on the subject of Pirates of the Caribbean, I want to jump ahead to when they were talking about Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3, Dead Man's Chest and World's End. And they spent a lot of time talking about Davy Jones and the development of that character. And so, the issue there was that you have this complex character whose beard is made up of tentacles, and they had to make it realistic, but how to go about doing that. And so, Bill Nye, the actor that performed Davy Jones, they dressed him up in this gray jumpsuit, and all of the
Mhm.
other denizens of the Flying Dutchman, and it was just so surreal seeing them there on set interacting with the
Yes.
likes of Johnny Depp, in these crazy suits, a little bit of makeup on their face, and you could see it. I've seen those movies so many times. When I got my first video iPod, I would watch these. These were some of the first A-list movies that were on that thing, and I watched them over and over and over again on my commute on the train to and from work. I mean, I would have like 30 or 45-minute commute depending on the day, and so I would just watch those first three Pirates movies over and over and over again until more better stuff started showing up there. And I just remember that performance, the way Davy Jones would snarl and some of the jaw movements he would do and stuff. And so to see him there, and it's not, he's got a little makeup on his face, but this guy in a gray jumpsuit, interacting with all of these actors dressed up as pirates with these incredible
Mhm.
costumes was just a little surreal at times. But just watching the digital makeup not having been applied and seeing them do that and the way everyone acted in the background, and it's like, my mind's eye filled in all the effects
Right.
because it was just so realistic looking in the movies. But getting to see all the effort that went into creating the artificial way to get all those tentacles to move was
Yeah.
so amazing and so super impressive.
Oh, it really was. And to your point, as far as watching them in all of their little gray suits with the little reflectors and things on it, I mean, just how incredible those actors are to be able to envision what the final product is going to look like from being able to act that out. And as they were talking about with Hal Hickel, just the idea that he didn't even have a bottom jaw, but yet he
Mhm.
was still moving it like he did, you know,
Right.
and it was just adding to that performance and doing all of those things. And, you know, as you said, with the tentacles and the way that he would just kind of jerk back and forth and everything. And I think that wasn't it John Knoll that was saying that that was the whole idea of being able to animate it in that way, because you don't want to be able to sit there as an audience member and look at that and go, oh, that's CG or whatever. Like, you just
Right.
wanna be able to, like, be sucked in by it. And that is the true testament of the work, is that as an audience member, like you said, you know, when you watch these movies, that you are just, like, sucked into that world, and you don't even think about it as being necessarily, I mean, you know, in your mind's eye, you know that it's an effect, but yet you buy into it as a story that it doesn't even matter at that point, that it's just so real.
Yeah, I think it was Hal Hickel that was talking
Al
about
Hickel
that.
that we're talking, okay, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
because he's talking about the malaise of audiences towards visual effects
Mhm.
back there in
Yes,
the
yes, yes.
2000s, and that it's just like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, that's a special effect, whatever." But then when you saw Davy Jones' face move like that, it's like, I don't know how they did that, I don't
Right,
understand how it
yeah.
is, and that was one of the cool things that I loved about the Pirates of the Caribbean movies is that, whether you had the undead pirates from the first one or you had Davy Jones and his cohort of, the crew of the Dutchman in the second and the third one, just the world building they were able to do in those movies through the special effects. And that even gets us to, later in this episode when Gore Verbinski, who directed the original Pirates, he gets to work with ILM to make Rango. And this notion of he's turning the visual effects artists from being people who'd work on shots to people who would tell stories.
Yeah,
And that was cool, but looking back on the rest of the episode is like, I kind of feel like that was there all along. Davy Jones' story is not believable, is not feasible, not possible without the work that ILM does on that to make all those tentacles look real, to make all of those every member of the crew of the Flying Dutchman look like they've been mutated by their curse into some sort of a
right,
sea creature there.
right, right. And I love, though, that they did use some of the workers, you know, scrubbing the decks and doing the work, and then, you know, recreating that. I thought that was really cool.
So what else? What else stood out to you from this episode?
Well, some really surprising things, like, for example, you know, when they were talking about War of the Worlds
Mhm.
and, you know, with Tom Cruise, and I was trying to remember if I had actually seen that movie at all. And then as they were getting into some of the special effects, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I think I did see this. And just things that you don't realize that are so innovative in terms of the different shots that they were able to take, that it looked like you were following, you know, Tom Cruise through the car and then the destruction and then all of these different things. And we often take for granted as an audience that there is so much more work that's involved with that than we actually realize. And, you know, things that a lot of these filmmakers were saying, like, this is the thing I'm most proud of, was this movie or these effects. And, you know, even though they don't necessarily always hit at the box office, or they don't always make the most money, that, you know, these are sometimes those works that, you know, as a creator or as a special effects worker, you know, person that's creating these kinds of things, that's what they are most proud of. And I thought, wow, that's really cool, you know, that it doesn't necessarily have to be the most money-making thing, that, you know, you worked your butt off and you can say, "Look at this. Like, this is, I am very proud of this. It may not have made all the money, but I loved being able to do this."
Yeah, so that was like Dennis Muren's last movie that he did there.
Mhm.
And I loved how when they were talking about how they put that race through the streets together, Tom Cruise and his on-screen children are in that minivan and they're racing through the streets and then like the bridge is blowing up behind them and then a tanker falls off the bridge and it explodes into a house. And so they'd filmed all this and then they made model houses and done the special effects on top of it, but they kept putting Dennis Muren in the car as he's talking about
Yes.
this.
Oh my gosh,
So
that was hilarious.
and it was like this thing, like he's having this very serious conversation. He's in a chair sitting across from Joe Johnson while this is
Right.
happening, but they put him flawlessly in the vacant passenger seat of this minivan
It was
and
perfect.
he's just
Perfect.
swaying along in unison with Tom Cruise and the
Mhm.
other actors that are there. It was so much fun to watch, and it's like I'm trying to pay attention to what he says, but I'm also chuckling a little bit what's
That's
going on
yes. I'm
because he's
glad
just
you brought that up.
yeah, he's just racing through the streets with them the entire time. I love that
Uh,
scene. Yeah, I did see that movie. I don't think I saw it in the theaters, but I remember seeing it at home on DVD
yes.
shortly after it
Yeah.
came out, and I watched the original a few times when I was a kid. It was one of those movies that would show up, like, on the weekend on
Mhm.
your local station or whatever, and I remember seeing it
Or
there and
late night.
yeah, and so and the other thing is, like, Steven Spielberg made this movie in 8 months. I mean, and, you
Yeah.
know, it needed,
That's
like
mind-blowing.
yeah, it was supposed to be something that really should take about a year and a half, and he just like, "Nope, I wanna do this and I wanna get it done," and yeah, so they did.
Yeah, and when Steven Spielberg says he wants something done, you do it.
Right, right. Um, backing up to a bit, one of the things that stood out to me on this thing was, Revenge of the Sith. We already talked about the lava a little bit, and again, after we saw them do the water in a perfect storm, and then water would come up again for the Maelstrom and World's End later, I was really expecting the lava to have been CG, but it
Yeah. Yes.
wasn't. They made an entire gigantic model of Mustafar, and then they used a substance called methocell, which they would then backlight essentially from the bottom to make it glow, and then they would put dark pieces of foam on top of it to look like the crusty bits they'd already cooled on top of the lava. And I was like, I admired that just for the dedication to this. It was
Mhm.
yeah, we're doing a lot of great stuff with CG, and that's what George Lucas wants. But at the end of the day, we got to make the lava look as real as possible. This is how we're going to do it. And the other great thing is anytime that John Knoll had an opportunity to narrate what the thinking was at Lucasfilm, for me, that was like some of the most captivating because he just kind of has this whimsical way of looking back at things, which is, yeah, we were given this challenge and I was trying to think and I really admired this other work. And so that's what they came
Mhm.
up with here. And he just presented that really well.
Yeah, and he's so chill about it too.
Yeah.
And even the other workers and creators would say, when they presented him with things, he's like, "Yep, looks good."
Uh
And
huh.
then he'd
Uh
just
huh.
move on.
Yeah. And then the last bit for Revenge of the Sith was that the digital doubles that they did.
Oh,
I
yeah.
did not realize that as much. I had assumed when a lot of the times when there were stunts, they just use a stunt actor, but instead they would still use stunt actors a lot of times, but then they would like a lot of the flips and jumps were created by making a digital double of the actor for that. I had
Mhm.
assumed that Count Dooku wandered in and came in for Christopher Lee and flipped over the rail. But no, that
Right.
was a digital double. And then they used that same technology for the lightsaber duel between Palpatine and Mace Windu. They essentially used a different actor and superimposed Ian McDermott's head on the guy
Yes.
for all that.
And it's kind of funny because you just sort of see, in some of the model renderings, Ian McDermott's just head and shoulders just kind of floating in midair
Yeah.
and flipping and doing all these weird things. I'll
Well,
never watch that the same way again.
can you imagine just like Ian McDermott being in a room, like making all those faces, like
Oh
lunge
my
forward, and
gosh.
I'm sure there's a
Yes.
lot of digital altering to it. But
Right.
again, for all of the innovations in CG, there still was a lot of model making. We were talking about the lava on Mustafar and stuff like that. But then they ultimately did sell off and close the model shop.
Yeah.
And that really hit a lot of people hard. What do you think about that segment?
Mhm. Yeah, that was tough because I mean, we've talked a lot about how, there are definitely pros and cons to digital effects versus practical effects. And that sometimes, cost effectiveness and practicality and that type of thing can drive things one way or another. And we definitely did get away from a lot of those practical effects for a very, very long time. And so the model shops were those types of things that were suffering. And, I can't remember who it was specifically that was talking about how, it was like all of a sudden all of these people were out of jobs and they were all laid off because there was just no place for them and there was no work for them. And, when they closed down Kerner in 2023 and they moved over to the Presidio, it was truly the end of an era for a lot of people. And, I was very sad for them. And, now that we're seeing this resurgence of practical effects, I'm sure that it's really making a lot of people very happy once again. But I was also impressed with the fact that they were doing all of the interviews in Kerner as well before they closed it down. So I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's just so fitting."
Yeah.
But yeah, but how did you feel about all that?
Well, because they moved into the Presidio, it was like, uh, I can't remember what the year was, but they'd been there for a while, and they sold off the
Mhm.
model shop, which stayed behind in Kerner. And then one of the executives there at the model shop was talking about how the revenue kept declining. It was 20 million, then it was 15, 10, and it was 5. And they're like, and she's like, guys, it's over. I mean, they just were
Yeah,
not bringing the revenue in to stay open, and those models were expensive. And yeah, models are still being used today, but not to the extent that they were in the past.
sure.
And just watching Joe Johnston get up there and give his speech at the party, as they're saying goodbye, and he was talking about how he showed up with the white suit, the prototype suit for Boba Fett, and he
Yes.
needed a place to
Mhm.
paint it. And they had just got the lease on Kerner, and George Lucas had acquired this, so go pick any room you want and do it. And then John Knoll getting up there and he, going into the Light and Magic documentary series, that was one of the names I recognize the most from Industrial Light and Magic.
Mhm.
And, and again, I've already mused about the way he just kind of talks about things and remembers the history. And you can see those smiles and the way he kind of looks off in the distance. He's talking about things. And, he's the one that shows up at the cons that we always get to meet. And he's the
Yes.
one that,
Mhm.
he's won an Oscar for, of all things, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest is his one Oscar win, despite the fact how innovative he's been in the space. But to see him give that speech about he showed up there and he hoped to learn from everybody, and he did. And now he's paying it forward by mentoring the next generation of
Yep.
people at Lucasfilm. And you could hear his voice crack when he's talking about that. How much that model shop and everyone that was there that got their start at Lucasfilm that are now being replaced by all the CG artists, and how much that meant to him. And that was just cool. I mean, because that's how the original Star Wars was made. There weren't much in the way of computer generated effects. I mean, the Death Star trench run was it, you
Oh,
know,
right.
it,
Yep.
back for A New Hope. And now you have 2,500 visual effects shots going into a Star Wars movie that are computer generated. So,
Right.
uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that was impressive too in that they were talking about how that had evolved from The Phantom Menace to Attack the Clones and then to Revenge of the Sith, and
Hmm.
how many of those shots were actually, digital effects. But, you know, getting back to what you were saying with mentoring the next generation, I can definitely empathize with that. You get to a point in your career where you think about what you've done and how far you've come, but then what can you leave behind, and what can you, again, pass that baton to and allow for even more growth for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I really admire those guys.
Oh, yeah.
It was, there are certain names you knew that I knew coming into this series. And now I know more names and I have a better appreciation for the names that I already knew, what they did and how important it is. And again, said it off the top of the episode, kind of seeing how much a visionary and an innovator that George Lucas was. And sometimes the thing that with like George Lucas is that he was the genius that brought us Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. But then there was the backlash when the prequels showed up, and it's like, well, how good a movie can he make? And we
Mhm.
completely take for granted all of the special effects that he pioneered with ILM on that he pushed for, and the sound that he pushed for. And he's kind of, as he's gotten later in life, he's become more and more soft spoken until you get him into these type of interviews and you see how
Yes.
smart and how sharp he is. And I was like, I kind of feel bad. I feel like I've taken this guy for granted, for a lot of years now, and I won't do that ever again.
Right, right. Well, I think we all have,
Yeah.
and but it is opportunities like this that, as you said, just really make you appreciate even tenfold, what we've already known.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. Well, any other final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Well, just once again, it's been an amazing series, and I'm very grateful that we had the chance to go behind the scenes and see all of these things and get a new appreciation, and also to open our eyes for all of the other types of works and not only innovations, but the way that these things have really inspired the entire movie making business, the entire filmmaking business in terms of sound design, digital effects, practical effects, and that it's truly going to live on in so many ways. And so it's been great to be able to review it with you.
Oh yeah, indeed, I agree. And yeah, I mean, the last final thought is just it amazed me that how many of these people that started ILM went on to found other companies,
Right.
and just the
Hmm.
camaraderie that there is in that industry. It's like they have to be hush hush and their lips are sealed while they're working on the project. But as soon as the movie comes out, they're like telling each other about everything they did
Yeah. How did you
and
do
how,
this? And how did you do that? And
you
yes.
know, the
Yes.
work that was being done by Weta on Lord of the Rings and the way they brought Gollum to life would then be
Hmm.
used to bring other characters to life in Star Wars. And
Right. And
so,
Avatar and yep,
yeah, yeah. So that was pretty cool. All right.
definitely.
Well, if you haven't seen this and you've listened to this anyway, we highly recommend you go check it out. It's an incredible documentary series, and it's something that may not sound exciting when you see it come up as your recommendation on Disney Plus, but it is worth the time. So go check it out. And with that, we hope you've enjoyed our discussion and our reflection on it. And if you have, and you want to hear more about what we have to say about Star Wars, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. It's pretty easy to do, and you found us, so I'm sure you know how to find it, how to subscribe. And once you've done that, we'd love your 5-star reviews and ratings and the like, and on your podcatcher helps others find the show. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found?
Absolutely. So we are very easy and conveniently found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And you can also check out our YouTube outlets. So we are on the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. And once again, we are at Podcast Stardust there as well. And we do maintain some Pinterest pages with all kinds of fun ideas for everything Star Wars. And if you are in need of some new Podcast Stardust swag, we have a TeePublic store. So you can check out one of our 7 different show logo designs available, or all 7 if you so desire. And if you are interested in that, every one of those purchases does help to support the show. So we really do appreciate that. And the link to that is in our show notes.
All right. What is the latest from the world of cosplay?
All right. So, right now, as I was mentioning, a little bit quiet on the cosplay front, but you can always check out my Instagram at j.snipscosplay for everything that I'm up to as Ahsoka, the fourth sister, 2 different versions of Hera, my Mandalorian, and you just never know what else you're going to find. So, if I do have anything coming up here this summer, I'll definitely be posting on that. I once again over on j.snipscosplay on Instagram.
Okay. Coming up on the show on Wednesday, we are getting into our review of Reign of Empire, Mask of Fear by Alexander Freed. And then on Friday, the plan is to do Star Wars news. But if you've been listening lately, we know that there isn't always a bundle of news to report on. So if it's light, we'll come up with something else to talk about. But make sure you join us for whatever it is. But we just want to say thanks for listening to episode 897 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the force be